This idea of reconstituting team, to me, is an urgent idea. I say that as a person who was in the local government for 30 years, and the chief planner, as many of you know, for 15 years, along with my colleague Ann McAfee. Ann and I were the only gender-integrated planning service in North America, and I'm proud to say that. She was a great colleague of mine. It was like a marriage, except there was only one problem. You could never disagree. Imagine that. Anyway, the reason I think that this idea is meritorious is that the local politics in the last few years has gotten lost. And this has to do with the sense of inclusive governance. And it also has to do a bit with with concepts of progressive city building. And it's kind of ironic to me, and it's already been said. Oops, we're getting an echo there. Someone better turn their machines off. That was the very same situation back in the 70s, in the 60s, and leading into the early 70s. That the concept of inclusive government had not really been a part of the tradition of Vancouver, and citizens were saying for the first time, that's the way modern government happens, and that's what we have to start to do. And Team came in and did it. And the second thing was that this was not a very progressive city back then. It was a nice city. I mean, it sits in the most beautiful landscape on the planet. But it was not really illustrating the ideas of the way cities were starting to build. And a lot of people said, and they were the academic, smart people of this city at that time, along with many, many others, who said, we have to get ahead of this. And we had a reason for that. And the team of the day knew it. And that was that this town was in an economic crisis. It was in an economic crisis because the whole economy was changing. The whole the resource industries were internationalizing, and we needed a new concept for our city. And we knew, and Team knew. Before I say we, I was not a part of Team. I was still in university when all of this was starting to happen. But they knew that the city, in order to be competitive, had to be a very contemporary city. I hope that my comments today will inspire you to go way beyond where Team had to go back in the 70s. But I am going to start that talk by remembering some of what that was about back in the 70s, because it's still about many of the things that the team of the day advocated and made true and made real. And so I'm going to mention a couple of those things. And some of you know that I wrote a book about this called Vancouverism. And my goodness, if you read my book, it's going to sound like the platform of the team of the day, because that platform became our driving force, and it echoed and it echoed and it echoed, and it grew and it diversified, and it became more and more real. And then we began to have names for things we were doing that we didn't have at the beginning, such as sustainability. Team did not know sustainability because that word had not been invented by the United Nations and the Brundtland Report yet. But everything they were talking about was moving in the direction of sustainability. I also, though, today, to engender your thinking, want to talk about a few of the issues that remain crises. The times did not solve all the problems, but I'm going to tell you something that I think I've learned, is that you never solve all the problems. The city is such a dynamic place that many of the things you do that are good engender things that are problematic, and so you have to constantly be double checking. And I like you use the word reset. In my book, I use the word reset because the city constantly has to reset itself to be contemporary to the needs of the day. And then I'm going to just ginger up the conversation a little bit by talking about a few things that are happening around the world with cities that I just think are cool and haven't yet really found their way to our city. And I'm hoping that your policy framework might actually bring some of those things into our thinking, doing them in our own way and all of that. So I'm going to talk for about 25 minutes, and I'm going to ask you to give me a cue in 20 minutes so that I don't go over. And if I start going over, you just start yelling, because I'd probably go on, forever. Anyway, let me start with a couple of principles, and I hope these principles, which were very much principles of the day for team, will be the principles for this reconstituted team. And they are right at the heart of what has started to go in the wrong direction. Part of these principles have to do with governance, and the first one is openness and transparency. There is no good reason for government to go into private session. Yes, there can be real estate things and stuff like that from time to time require that. I can see that. But policy making, planning, all the things that we are interested in shaping our city should be done with openness and transparency. The second is real public engagement. Public engagement in this city, and I'm sorry to say to some degree in this country, has become pro forma. We have events, we do things, and then we do what we're going to do anyway. We have to get back to techniques that work for folks in their way, in their setting, that reach out to people who don't normally get to participate and be a part of it. And we have to change our mind based on what we learn and we hear. In other words, we have to be very open-minded. So that real public engagement to me is so profound and has gotten so lost that I really hope you will embrace that as a fundamental of the new team. The third, interestingly enough, is a kind of a conservative idea. And that is handling the basics of city living. We get wrapped up in some of the energetic new ideas, and in this town we've forgotten the basics. Things like cleanliness of our streets, the repair of sidewalks, the keeping everything up to date with the qualities that we all want on a day-to-day basis. And so I hope in a governance sense that this new team will say, with all we're doing, we will do the basics. And every citizen can depend on that. And those three ideas, I just want to use one example where I just see this has gone so sideways, and it's given me a lot of anguish. And that is the recent experience, the ongoing experience that's continuing this coming Tuesday with Falls Creek South, where a group of citizens have created a magnificent community, 2/3 of them modest and middle income, 1/3 of them higher income, and helping to support the 2/3 modest and middle income folks to be there, who have lived there for years and years and who have created a genuine community. They cross-subsidize one another, they help one another, they have lots of organizations. And now the city is kind of treating them like interlopers. They're treating them, I'm sorry to say, that they can't really be trusted to do a new plan for the future of the community. Even though these citizens have said they'd love to work with the city on this, and they'd love to be doing a new plan, and they'd love to invite a lot more people to come and live in this community with them. But we have to remember that this was one of the most fundamental achievements of the original team, in my opinion, was to create that community of 1/3 low-income people, 1/3 middle-income people, 1/3 high-income people, living in harmony for many, many years on land that still is in city ownership and can be used for the next generation and the following generation and the following generation after that. It was an amazing accomplishment, and every single citizen made it better. And now they're in jeopardy. And they're in jeopardy because these principles of governance openness, transparency, real public engagement, and handling of the basic needs have not been abided by, have not been the guidance for the current decision makers. When it comes to the city building side, there are three ideas that were just growing at the time of TEAM, and they have become profound for cities not only here. We, in fact, kind of were early in this, and we kind of modeled it from many other cities, so I now know, but are now for cities around the world. Progressive cities want to be livable, they want to be sustainable, they want to be resilient. And if I took all of that stuff and I put it into one word, it was actually Jane Jacobs that gave me this word. I asked her this. I had my chance, and I thought I should really ask, what makes a greatest city? And she said it does come down to one word, and that one word is diversity. And so every time you pull things apart, every time you pull people apart, every time you favor one person over another, you lose diversity, and you lose the basic premise of a workable, harmonious city. And so to me, that is the overarching, the mega driver in terms of the city building side of those themes. Now, I know you're going to show many images in a few minutes, but let me just remind you of some of the component parts of what I'm talking about from those team years and that carried on during my time. Neighborhoods were the fundamental building block. Everything was built within a framework of open space and parks, and we had standards for that. Social diversity and harmony was fundamental. We didn't go far enough, I'll come back to that, but we started that practice, which had not been going on very well before. Active mobility has come increasingly in, moving away from the car, transit, alternatives to the car. Urban design came into play. The team people were amazing and insightful in their day, the founders, because they knew you had to design the city. We now know you have to design everything. But back in those days, cities were not designed. They had not been designed since the 18th century. And they brought design in. And then increasingly, they didn't know they were even doing this, but they increasingly were putting the foundation together of the green agenda, which has become so important to us now. We have never looked back on that decision that they made about no freeways. We tested it a couple of times during my tenure, by the way, and citizens widely said, "Good idea, stay with it. Don't go back on that." We've never gone back on their idea of fixing inner city neighborhoods. You have to remember, in those days, neighborhoods were dying. They were dying a desperate death. And we've never gone back on the idea of repopulating the city, that idea of diversity, so that no matter where you are in the city, there will be people working, people living, people playing, people being together. That has been what I was all about. That's what my book is about. That's what I make my living elsewhere in the world talking about. But there are some disruptors. And I want to come to a few of those disruptors. And a couple of these have become particularly vivid as a result of the COVID years, this 2 years that we've all been living with COVID. And one of those is remote work. Before this COVID came along, there was a few people that worked at home. We now know that tens of thousands, millions of people will be working at home. And we have to ask ourselves, in the modern city building context, what does that mean? What does that mean? And there's two things that I'm pretty sure about, because I think it will settle. It won't settle in at 100%, 90%, 80%, 60% of people working at home, but it probably will settle in at 30%, and that will have a profound effect. And the two things that I think become remarkably necessary if that is happening, one is that our neighborhoods have to be complete places so that you can work at home and yet have all the services and supports that you need. Our city is doing fairly well in that. Our region isn't, but our city is. And we have to reinforce that. I haven't seen a solid initiative going back into communities for at least a decade, if not more, where we're saying to communities, how's the state of this place? How's the state of your neighborhood? What can we add? What needs to change? And doing it with people, the hard way. Not the easy way. Not saying, we're no longer going to have rules and you can just plop up a 10-story building wherever you want. I'm sorry, I don't agree with that. I will never agree with that. I think that's wrong. Because our neighborhoods are the sacred foundation of our livability. That doesn't mean there shouldn't be change and intensification in neighborhoods. There should be. But we should let every neighborhood decide how they want to do that, decide how they would add that in, decide how they want to make greatness in their city. The second, and this city is ahead of most cities, is that remote work means that downtowns have to have a lot of people living there. Because those same people are going to be working there. And if you don't have people living in your downtown, it's going to die. You can already see this in Calgary. The vacancy rate is up to 37% at the moment. They're trying to start converting buildings to housing, and I hope they do a good job on that. We do have a head start, but we aren't doing this right. We don't have the right mix. This has become an elite part of the city. This has to be a part of the city that has access for everyone. In my opinion, and this is controversial, the Falls Creek Flats should be the place that we bring in the incredible diversity of our core city, where people can live and work at home, rather than have it as just a modest industrial place at the edge of downtown. And I've been saying that for a long time, but that's an illustration. It also means that outside the core, outside the city, in the different town centers, those have to come alive. They have to have all that's needed. They have to have housing and services so that as people are working remotely, they will not be disconnected. Working remotely does not mean that people want to be in their homes 24 hours a day. They're going to still want to meet, have coffee, have love affairs, find partners, whatever you do. And we have to have those places for them in the city. The other big new disruptor, of course, is e-commerce. And this is one thing I hope you will try to take in hand in your policy work. Because on the one hand, it's coming. On the other hand, it could kill many of the independent retailing that we all love and have taken for granted for so long. Why is that? Because it can kind of outcompete the local retailer, the independent retailer. And we have to do things to provide some new supports. There probably needs to be a new taxation system for modest independent retailing as we move forward. There's a lot of other implications of e-commerce. How we get goods from those warehouses to the home is a very big issue, and what are going to be the impacts of that? So remote work and e-commerce is something I hope you will add to your thinking, that repertoire of good city building that team has given us. The big issues, though, the ones that will make or break this city, are these. First, affordability. If we do not get our minds around affordability, which, by the way, is not just a problem here, it is a problem in every successful city in the world. I've worked in many of them, and it is a big problem everywhere. But if we don't get our minds around it, we are going to be removing more and more people, and we are in a world where the wealthy will always outcompete local wealth. And so, for the first time, I'm advocating that we not only have a private market, but we also, and a non-market low-income sector, but we need a secure middle-income sector of housing. So this will be housing delivered in very different ways than we've delivered housing in the past. It won't just be a developer building and you buy, or a government building and allocating that to low-income folks. It's going to be some combination. It's going to take public and private investment, and it's going to have government framework in order to make sure that investment does create secure housing. And we're going to need new forms of tenure. Nonprofit home ownership, for example. Rent to own, for example. Yes, we need rental. Yes, much more rental. But the young people are also saying to us, you older people used your home to create wealth. We'd like that opportunity too. And so we have to diversify to create many more options for people. I do not believe a tax move, one way or another, is going to solve this problem. We put a lot of taxes in place. I just saw a condo in downtown Vancouver on sale for $19 million. It seems to me we need to do more. We're not just going to have one project or even 10 projects. We're going to have to develop pervasively a whole mission across the public and private sector if we're ever going to solve this problem of affordability. There are cities that have solved it or are solving it. Vienna is solving it. Madrid is solving it. To some degree, Hong Kong is solving it. So we have to really pull together. We have to bring in other governments. We have to bring in the private sector and build this new middle-income, secure sector of housing. The other one, and it is powerfully impactful, is the street situation and homelessness in our city. A situation that on the one hand, I could tell you as a middle-class person, brings a lot of anguish to me, but on the other hand, if you're one of the people living that hell, it is really something that brings on even more negativity. I'm working with a group that's called Building Community Society. Mike Harcourt is a part of that, and many other people you might know. And we're asking government to change the complete way they manage this combination: homelessness, mental illness services, and addiction services. Right now, they're done in different ministries. They're done in different ways. You fall out of one, you fall into the other. The very fact of being homelessness brings on mental illness. We could go on and on. And we do have to bring those together. We're advocating, actually, the funding goes with the person, not with the institutions, and we will start to solve that problem. And then the last one has to do with our suburbs. We really do have to rethink our suburbs. We have done very good in the city of Vancouver towards a sustainability agenda. But there is no city in our country that comes anywhere close to the cities of Northern Europe because our suburbs are the same they were in the 1950s. They are auto-oriented, they are not sustainable, they're using too much land, they're not keeping enough natural systems, etc., etc. I could also talk about the fact that the planning process and the regulatory process is broken. I think you have to help us fix that. I could also talk more about the basics that average citizens are looking for in a successful local government. But I just want to close with these two issues that I think are also sweeping the country and are very relevant to this policy session. The first, of course, is Indigenous reconciliation. We're doing a starting job on this, but we're not doing a very good job on this. We have got at least to the point where we are in a collaboration with the First Nations who have special rights under our Constitution. But we haven't got to the place where their reaching their destiny is also managed against all the concerns of everyone else to create a harmonious city that works for everyone. And we have to get there, and that means much more collaboration with our First Nations. And the second one, and I don't even know, I can't even give you the answers to this yet, is the reshaping of our city for equity, diversity, and inclusion. We don't yet understand just how exclusive our city is to the disengaged, the disadvantaged. We have to join them to determine what that's all about, and we have to do some reshaping that we've never even done before. if we truly want to be an inclusive society. And Canada is one of the most inclusive societies, but we have to go a lot further. I could talk now about the fun things, the share economy. I'm not going to do it. Share economy, new mobilities, alternative home tenures. But let me just close with these thoughts. Number one, this city, the way it's being managed now, is not serving anyone. It's serving less and less people all the time. I see it constantly. People say, I've got this problem, I've got that problem. That's not a state of grace. Number two, we have to bring citizens back to the center of government as partners. Number three, we have to find a new consensus for what the city of the future is about. The old consensus doesn't meet all these things I've been talking about, and it leaves too many people out. And number four is that these hardest issues that I've just highlighted are actually putting the future of this city in danger. It's putting our economy in danger. It's putting ourselves and our families in danger. That's what I hope that the new team will tackle. Thank you very much.